Hello, my name is Charles Upton, and this is another in my little series of videos which are featuring different themes built around different books. They're sort of reviews or ads of various books, some of which I wrote, some of which other people wrote. This is one for one I wrote called Folk Metaphysics, Mystical Meanings in Traditional Folk Songs and Spirituals. The way this book came about is that I'm now living in Kentucky now, but I grew up in California. I lived with my wife there for 30 years, but we moved back here now because she's from Kentucky. And but all along those years, we would visit almost every year and go to her mother's house in Pike County and sit in this house where time hangs very heavy, like water dripping off a limestone stalactite deep in a cavern somewhere where the sun refused to shine. And so to get through one of these periods when absolutely nothing was happening, you keep looking at your watch, what? Only 90 seconds have passed? I decided to try my hand at doing a metaphysical exegesis of the lyrics of a song that we had heard recently by folk singer Jean Ritchie, who was pretty well known in folk circles. I mean, she came out of Perry County, Kentucky. She was part of that folk revival of the '60s that gave us Bob Dylan and Joan Baez and people like that. And she went from Kentucky to New York and made it and became well known in that world. And this is one of her signature songs. And it's called Fair Nottamun Town. She went actually later to England and found out this was a version of Fair Nottingham Town, which is a mummer song. But this passed to her directly through oral tradition from her family in Perry County. And she told us at the concert we heard her at that if anybody, there's like a curse on this song. If anybody ever finds out what these words mean, these lyrics mean, now to lose all their luck. So I figured I had little to lose, so I decided to figure it out. Here's the lyrics to Fair Nottamun Town. In Fair Nottamun Town, not a soul would look up, not a soul would look up, not a soul would look down. Not a soul would look up, not a soul would look down to show me the way to Fair Nottamun Town. I rode a gray horse, a mule roany mare, gray mane and gray tail, green stripe down her back, gray mane and gray tail, green stripe down her back, and there wa'n't a hair on her but what was coal black. She stood so still, she threw me to the dirt, she tore on my hide and bruised my shirt. From saddle to stirrup I mounted again, and on my 10 toes I rode over the plain. Met the king and the queen and a company more, a riding behind and a marching before, come a stark-necked drummer, a beating a drum, with his hands in his bosom, come marching along. They laughed and they smiled, not a soul did look gay. They talked all the while, not a word did they say. I bought me a quart to keep gladness away, and to stifle the dust, for it rained the whole day. Set down on a hard, hot, cold, frozen stone. 10,000 stood around me, yet I was alone. Took my hat in my hands for to keep my head warm. 10,000 got drowned, but never was born. And I was supposed to say Fair Nottamun Town, copyright 1964, 1979, Jean Ritchie, Geordie Music Publishing Company. So, yeah. So, that's what started me on doing metaphysical exegeses of traditional folk songs, because I've come to the conclusion, I'm fully satisfied that some of these songs are consciously composed little metaphysical essays. They're just word perfect. And whoever composed them knew exactly what he or she was talking about. Highly informed people in the spiritual sense. Not every song, certainly, not every traditional ballad, but, when I asked myself who these people might have been that put these songs together, cat, no, well, she's in heat, and so she figures that there's lots of tomcats out there. Could be. So I said to myself, the Christian Hermeticists is a possibility. I'm not sure of that. That's my guess. Anyway, let me read you the first paragraph of the introduction. I'll give you an overview of what I'm doing. In this book, I do my best to throw light on the spiritual meanings and the metaphysical worldview hidden in certain traditional Appalachian, English, Scottish, and Cornish folk songs, as well as in a few Negro spirituals. Not all traditional folk songs contain such meanings. A song like Matty Groves, for example, is pretty much about what it appears to be about: seduction, adultery, and revenge. And only a few spirituals have a hidden spiritual meaning beneath the more obvious one. But certain songs, virtually any song that has a riddle in it, for example, are deliberately constructed to transmit a great mass of spiritual lore in a dense, compacted form. I don't claim that my interpretations are the only valid ones. The meaning of every true symbol, every true myth is inexhaustible. In some cases, I've used a particular song as a kind of key or catalyst to tap the spiritual lore hoard of the human race. But it is crystal clear to me that many traditional songs are packed with explicit spiritual doctrine, and that the people who wrote them knew exactly what they were talking about. And the songs that I do are The Lady Gay. These are the chapter titles. The Lady Gay, A Map of the Spiritual Life. Puri Miri Dictum Domini, Return to the Quintessence. Fair Nottamun Town, Mystical and Alchemical Symbolism in an Appalachian Folk Song. Hold On, an essay on spiritual method. Green Grow the Rushes O, or the Dilly Song, a Pythagorean ballad from Cornwall. 3 Ballads of Fallen Redemption, these are taken from the Child collection. Thomas Reimer, Kemp Owen, and the Laley Worm and the Mackerel of the Sea. And Scarborough Fair, God as a Seeker. You know, the singer in that song is God, by the way. So, I've got a couple of quotes here from 2 of the authorities I follow. One, Ananda Kumar Swami, and one, Rene Guénon. Ananda Kumar Swami was an Anglo-Indian writer on metaphysics and traditional art theory, who ended up to be a curator of a art museum in Boston. I was privileged to know his son, Rama. And Rene Guénon, a French metaphysician. And they pretty much give the theory of folklore that I'm working on. This is Ananda Kumar Swami. He says, by folklore we mean that whole and consistent body of culture which has been handed down, not in books, but by word of mouth and in practice from time beyond reach of historical research, in the form of legends, fairy tales, ballads, games, toys, crafts, medicine, agriculture, and other rites and forms of organization, especially those we call tribal. This is a cultural complex independent of national and even racial boundaries and of remarkable similarity throughout the world. The content of folklore is metaphysical. Our failure to recognize this is primarily due to our own abysmal ignorance of metaphysics and of its technical terms. Folklore ideas are the form in which metaphysical doctrines are received by the people and transmitted by them. In its popular form, a given doctrine may not always have been understood, but so long as the formula is faithfully transmitted, it remains understandable. Superstitions, for the most part, are no mere delusions, but formulae of which the meaning has been forgotten. We are dealing with the relics of an ancient wisdom, as valid now as it ever was. We shall only be able to understand the astounding uniformity of the folklore motifs all over the world and the devoted care that has everywhere been taken to ensure their correct transmission, if we approach these mysteries, for they are nothing less, in the spirit in which they have been transmitted from the Stone Age until now, with the confidence of little children, indeed, but not the childish self-confidence of those who hold that wisdom was born with themselves. The true folklorist must not so much be a psychologist as a theologian and a metaphysician if he is to understand his material, nor can anything be called a science of folklore, but only a collection of data that considers only the formulae and not their doctrine. And then Rene Guénon, basically he says in this section that folk productions are not produced, and they're not created by the folk. They're created by highly informed individuals, a spiritual intelligentsia, if you will, and they're disseminated among the folk in order to preserve them. I think there's a lot of truth in that. That's not the whole story. I don't entirely agree with that, but that does happen, and that's something that has to be taken into consideration. Guénon says, when a traditional form is on the verge of extinction, its last representatives may very well deliberately entrust to this collective memory of which you have just spoken, the folk memory, what would otherwise be irrevocably lost. This, in short, is the only way to save what we can, at least in some measure, save what can, at least in some measure, be saved. And at the same time, the natural incomprehension of the masses is a sufficient guarantee that whatever possesses an esoteric character will not be despoiled in the process, but will remain as a sort of witness to the past for those in later times who may be capable of understanding it. And I almost entirely agree with that. The place where that is not a perfect statement of the truth of the matter was revealed to me when I phoned Jean Ritchie and asked for permission to publish lyrics of her song, which she very kindly gave me for free. And she told me the story. She says, one of these stanzas was lost. And, nobody in my family, this passed to her in Perry County, Kentucky, through her family. Nobody in my family could remember it. But one time I was walking along in the woods, and I had this vision. And a vision came to me, and I saw this vision. And the vision became the missing stanza. It was of the missing stanza, which I saw, visually, and then I turned it into a stanza, a lyric stanza, and stuck it in. And this is the one that came to her in her vision. Met the king and the queen and a company more, a riding behind and a marching before, come a stark naked drummer, a beating the drum, with his hands in his bosom, come marching along. So this is a very interesting datum, because it shows that although these songs that are, like I say, word-perfect metaphysical essays and stories of the stages of the spiritual path, could only have been composed initially by single individuals who knew just what they were talking about. There's no such thing really as a folk composition. Every pot was made by one potter. Every song was made by one singer. This is not a group or a committee effort. But, the truth is that since Jean Ritchie was working within a living tradition, she could channel some of the wisdom that's being passed in a mysterious and almost transpersonal way through this tradition, and come in with something that perfectly filled the gap in the song. And then I come along who understand metaphysics, and she doesn't give a damn about metaphysics. She was rather puzzled that I should be writing a book about folk songs of folk metaphysics. All right, I suppose stranger things have happened was her attitude, but she didn't care about that part. But she transmitted it perfectly because she was working in the tradition. And then I, who understand metaphysics, if you don't mind saying so quite well, came along, and I could say exactly what it meant. Precisely what it meant. And if you want to know, buy my book.